everyone for having me along. It's great. I love getting around to different groups to talk about the Orange Door, particularly very excitingly now that we are open in the inner east Melbourne area. So I've got a few slides that I'll run through and I'll share that in a moment, and then happy for that to be sent around afterwards for everyone's reference. It may be easier as we go along, but pop any questions you have in the chat, just particularly because I probably won't be able to see people's faces while I'm sharing the screen. But otherwise also I'll definitely stop at the end and happy to take any questions then as well. So obviously my name is Brendan Wilson and I'm from Family Safety Victoria, which is a part of the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. So I come from the inner eastern Melbourne Orange Door, which is one of a number of Orange Doors across the state. So obviously our Orange Door will cover the area that some of you work in, but there will be other Orange Doors and my counterparts in those Orange Doors who you may very well connect with in other areas. But more than happy to talk generally about the Orange Door and what it is. And of course, I can help with connecting you up with your local Orange Door representatives if that's something that you're needing as well. So I will pop up some slides. Hopefully this works for us. Okay. Now, is everybody seeing my slides there? Yes, excellent. And if I move things around here, I can see most people on the screen, which is great. Okay. So the Orange Door. Now, some of you may be familiar with this already, or for some of you it might be completely new. But essentially the Orange Door came out of the Royal Commission into Family Violence back in 2016. So there was a specific recommendation in the Royal Commission around implementing what it called support and safety hubs. So when you hear that language, what's being talked about is essentially the Orange Door. So the state government has branded support and safety hubs as the Orange Door. But it's important to point out that the Orange Door is not just a family violence service. We are also there to support families with child wellbeing concerns, whether there is or isn't family violence occurring in those families. And so the other kind of key policy document or strategic element of our work comes from the Roadmap for Reform, which is about the children and families services system across Victoria. So the most important first question is obviously, what is the Orange Door? So really simply, the Orange Door is the new area-based intake and assessment point for services that support women and children victims, survivors of family violence, for men who use violence or perpetrators of family violence, and as I mentioned before, families where there are concerns around child wellbeing. So previously, and I can speak specifically to the Inner East, but it might have been a little bit different in other areas. So in the Inner East, we had a number of organisations that were the intake point for those services. So EDVOS, for example, is the key provider in the Eastern region for victim survivor supports. Child First has been across the state. So Child First was the intake point for child wellbeing services. And then there are a range of organisations that deliver things like men's behaviour change. So what happens with the Orange Door is basically we're replacing all those entry points. So now all the referrals for those services come to the Orange Door first. And we'll make that kind of integrated, holistic assessment of needs for a family and connect them through to other services that they might be needing. So the reason why we've got the Orange Door is clearly around trying to make, and this is what came out of the Royal Commission into Family Violence very strongly, is about trying to make the service system easier to navigate and access for families and clients seeking support. So we're basically saying that it shouldn't be up to individuals who need support to have to navigate all the different services and organisations and who they go to for what. That should be on us as a service system to help them through that. And so the Orange Door is a that single entry point. It's visible, it's designed to be accessible so that people can come to us and really then have their needs holistically assessed and connected to other services. Also importantly, as I said, it's around accessibility, and that means trying to provide a range of options for people to connect and to connect when and where it feels comfortable for them. And one important thing, which I guess is a little bit different from how our current service system had been operating, is much more of a focus in family violence around perpetrators and keeping them in view and understanding of actually their clients that we need to intervene with and have a accountability for as well. So the Orange Door is going to be across the whole state by the end of next year. That is the intention. We're about halfway there. So I think there are 10 or 11 Orange Doors open at the moment. There are 17 areas across the state that will have the Orange Door. So we've got, I think, 3 or 4 that are due to open this year, and then there's another handful that are due to open next year. So as you can kind of see from the map there, although Metro Melbourne is fairly small in there, the places that have the Orange Door already, and I'm trying to remember what you mentioned before, Kellyanne, but Loddon covers the Bendigo region. So there is an Orange Door in Bendigo, and that has been operating for a bit over a year, I think. So my counterpart up in Loddon is Kylie Emerson. So some of you may or may not have heard from Kylie. Northeast Melbourne is operating. So Preston and that whole region is covered by Northeast Melbourne. They were one of the first Orange Doors. My counterpart in the Northeast Melbourne area is Del Orlick. She's on secondment at the moment, so I'm not sure there's anyone else in that role, but she'll be back soon enough. And some of you, again, may have had contact with Del. You can see there, Bayside Peninsula, Inner Gippsland, Barwon, the Western District, Goulburn, Ovens Murray, and the Mallee are all operating. And as of 5 weeks ago, Inner Eastern Melbourne. So we're the newest Orange Door to have opened. Southern Melbourne probably covers some of the area that some of you are working in. That Orange Door is due to open probably in November. And then there's Outer Eastern Melbourne, which will be next year. And I get a lot of questions about Outer East because we have a lot of services that cover both. So I've got the inner part, and there'll be someone else who will be covering the outer part. But important, obviously, to note that the Orange Door is a statewide network. So whilst we are area-based and we have different teams and different staff in each area, it's the same model across the state, and you can expect the same kind of response. And we all use the same system and have close relationships as well. So we hope that the catchments aren't too strict and that there is plenty of flexibility for us to support clients across kind of borders. So this slide here just gives you a quick idea of what the Orange Door does. So we're intake and assessment, but clearly there's a few different elements of that. So some of it is obviously screening, intake, triage, so that upfront taking referrals, processing those referrals. There's assessment and planning, so it's where we're engaging with clients, understanding what are their risks and needs and what kind of response will they need. There is an element of kind of brief intervention, brief casework and crisis response. We have brokerage available in the Orange Door, so if people have immediate needs, we can address those to increase safety, to improve children's wellbeing. And then importantly, as an intake service, we are then connecting people on to other services that they might need. So if someone needs longer term case management around their experience of family violence, for example, we would then connect them into EDVOS in our region. It's different in other regions, but we connect them to EDVOS to provide that support. Similarly, families in need of kind of more intensive or longer term family services support, we would connect them to integrated family services, which is delivered by a range of organisations across each catchment. And similarly, we would be doing that with broader services as well. So of course, if someone comes to us primarily because of family violence or child wellbeing concerns, but there are some housing issues, or there's some mental health concerns, or there are some legal issues that need addressing, we'll have connections with those organisations to be able to refer the clients through. This slide here is a little bit complex, and I don't expect you to read all of the wording on there, but just to give you an idea of who's in the Orange Door, it's quite a unique model in the sense that we're a single entity or a single program. Clear branding, it is the Orange Door, that's what we are, but actually our staff are employed by a range of organisations. So the staff working in the Orange Door primarily come from the community organisations on the left-hand side there. So EDVOS, they bring in staff with specialism around working with victims and survivors of family violence, Anglicare around specialisms of perpetrators, Uniting is our child wellbeing lead, and VACA and Bundwan Willem are our Aboriginal services in the Inner East. Now, every Orange Door will have a different mixture of organisations. They'll have those same specialisms represented, but there will be different organisations who deliver them. But in a sense, hopefully that's not too obvious to people outside the Orange Door. We want people to understand they're engaging with the Orange Door, and it's as simple as that. Who it is exactly that they're engaging with probably doesn't matter too much as long as their needs are being met and that those staff have the skills and knowledge to address those needs. You can kind of see from the structure here, we've clearly got a few different roles in the Orange Door. Some of the staff, they're employed by Family Safety Victoria, so that includes myself and our hub manager. And then we've got a selection of practice leads, team leaders, and then our practitioners. We also have a close working relationship with child protection. So the community-based child protection practitioners work within the Orange Door.
Sorry, Brendan, can I just ask if you could change your screen sharing to full present?
Sure.
Thanks.
There we go. Is that better?
Yes, perfect, thanks.
And again, I'll send the slides around so you can have a bit of a read of this afterwards. I don't expect you to be able to read everything on there. Again, just giving it, there's a bit more detail here than some of you might be interested in this detail, but again, just to give you a sense of how we operate and who's in the Orange Door. So we have staff from a range of organisations, but they're actually working in integrated teams. So that's very new in the sense that they're literally in the same team. So we've got teams that deliver different functions, but those teams have staff from a range of backgrounds and employers. So for example, our kind of screening and intake team, at the moment, the team leader is from EDVOS, but underneath that team leader are staff from Uniting, EDVOS and Anglicare. So together they are coming up with, using all their different knowledge and skills and specialisms, they're coming up with a single integrated assessment and response plan for a particular client. They're all looking at the same information and they're having live conversations about that information, the best way to respond to it. Similarly, we've got a hybrid team. So this is the team that when a client calls themselves, they would connect with this team, which means they then don't have to move from one worker to another. So the person who talks to them on the phone is the person who will be doing the assessment with them and then connecting them out to other services. We've got 5 assessment and planning teams, and we've got 1 Aboriginal team who clearly are working with our Aboriginal clients who are looking for that specific response. Obviously, the Orange Door is a part of the broader service system. It doesn't replace it all. It's becoming a fairly central part, but we importantly need to connect with a range of other services and service systems. So you can see there, some of those will have very close working relationships with, and those services are a part of the Orange Door in terms of family violence, child and family services, perpetrator services, child protection, Aboriginal services. There are some who we will connect with probably pretty frequently because of the nature of our clients' needs. So mental health, justice, AOD, for example. And then there's the broader community who most likely are going to be referring into the Orange Door and potentially seeking consultation. Your services probably fit in that category: education, youth, aged care, health, maternal and child health. They're all the examples of services who we're likely to be getting referrals from. Now, this is the details for the Inner Eastern Melbourne Orange Door. As I said before, there will be slightly different details depending on what area you are in as to who you contact. But if you are in the Inner East region or clients you're working with are, that's our 1-800 number there. That's our email address. And there's also a statewide website, and I've got this on the final slide as well. But that's probably the best first point of call if you're seeking support, because what happens is you basically put in the postcode for where the person who's in need of support lives, and it will let you know what the local intake is for services. So whether it is an Orange Door, and it will give you those Orange Door details, or for the areas where the Orange Door hasn't started operating yet, it will give you the details for local services that deliver those intakes. We have our primary site for the Inner East in Box Hill. For those who are familiar with the area, it's on Prospect Street. That's where most of our staff will be based, but we will also have an access point or essentially a secondary office in the city of Monash. So somewhere like Glen Waverley, Mount Waverley. We're just trying to identify that location at the moment. But the Orange Door also is an outreach model, or there is outreach as a part of what we do. So our practitioners can go out into the community to connect with people. And that includes the potential for us to have what we call outposts. Got lots of different language we use in the Orange Door, but that's essentially a co-location. So we can have Orange Door practitioners sitting in community locations to be available to clients. So that might be an MCH centre, it might be an education service, a health service. There's some of the examples from across the state. And that's the case with all the Orange Doors. So every Orange Door will have a primary site, they will have an access point, they might have more than one access point, and they will also have outposts. So for example, in northeast Melbourne, the primary site is in Heidelberg. For Loddon, obviously the primary site is in Bendigo. For Bayside Peninsula area, it's in Frankston. But then there are a range of other places where people can access the service. This here just gives you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like in the Orange Door. This, I think, is the Heidelberg office. But all the Orange Doors look very similar. So we've got the same kind of colour scheme, design, furniture, etc. The layout might be different. Our Box Hill office is shaped differently to Heidelberg, but you can walk into any Orange Door and it's a consistent experience in terms of what you'll see. And there are, so if you or people you're working with are interested, there are some videos and other things available online where you can have a look at what it looks like in an Orange Door and hear about what it's like to work in an Orange Door and how we respond. I was just going to touch on a few things, again, for those that might be interested around what really enables our work in the Orange Door and what might be a bit different from what exists already. A lot of that is around information sharing. So the Orange Door is supported by a whole heap of reforms and legislation around the sharing of information relating to family violence, but also child wellbeing. So we can access information from a range of different places to inform our assessment of someone's needs. So that includes the child protection database, police, family services, housing, the courts, depending on who the client is and risks that might be present. There is a whole range of information that we can have access to obviously to support client needs. And just up there, a lot of you might be familiar with the MARAM. There's a lot of talk around about the MARAM. So that's the key family violence assessment framework that we use. But we're also guided by the best interest case practice model, which is enshrined in legislation, or they both are. And it talks about how we should be working with children and young people, clearly with a focus on the best interests of the child at the heart of what we do. I've touched on a couple of times the importance of accessibility in the Orange Door. Clearly, we want people of all backgrounds, abilities, cultures, genders to feel comfortable and to be able to access the Orange Door. And that doesn't happen automatically. So clearly there's lots of things we need to do to make our service accessible. But some examples, particularly around the Aboriginal community, we've got a really strong focus on accessibility and inclusion for our Aboriginal clients and community. So we have Aboriginal practitioners, which I've referenced, and an advisory group. So we call the Aboriginal Advisory Group for each Orange Door. We're lucky in the Inner East, and I'm sure other Orange Doors will be the same, that we have staff who come from a range of backgrounds. And a number who speak a range of different languages other than English, which is obviously really helpful when you're working in a diverse community like we are in the Inner East, and a number of other Orange Doors are. All our staff receive induction training from In Touch, which I think might have been mentioned just before I came in. So they've provided support to our staff around working with multicultural community. And we have a statewide inclusion action plan for the Orange Door. And then each Orange Door will have its own local inclusion action plan that aligns to that. So talking about the key kind of things that we need to put in place to engage our local community. Translated materials, having access to interpreters. There are a couple of other really practical examples of how we're trying to make sure we're as accessible as possible. But we're always very open to more suggestions and feedback about how we can do that. And that's one of the things I'm hoping people might have views about. I'm presenting to our Regional Advisory Committee tonight from the Multicultural Commission. And again, hoping to get some feedback from them around our Eastern region community and how we can make sure we're accessible to them. There is my details at the bottom, Brendan Wilson, Service System Navigator. Up the top there, for those who are really interested, if you've got lots of time for reading, you can access quite a few documents about the Orange Door online. So if you wanted to read about our service model, our brokerage guidelines, we've got some interface agreements with key services on there, and a range of other resources. So they're publicly available. But also importantly, there is the Orange Door website itself, which is designed for clients and for professionals who might be seeking support. And there's information there in fairly easy language around what the Orange Door does and what people can expect, but also, of course, the opportunity to connect with your local Orange Door or your local family violence and child wellbeing services if you don't have the Orange Door. Now that's it in terms of my presentation, and I've had no idea what my timing's been like, so I hope I haven't gone too far over or too far under, but if there's still plenty of time, happy to take as many questions as people might have.
Yeah, you did good with time, Brendan. It's just about 3 o'clock, so there is time for questions. There was one in the chat about it's disappeared now, but where do men go for domestic violence help?
So is that in relation to men who are victim survivors of family violence or men who are using violence?
Barbara, did you want to elaborate on your question?
Yes, victim survivors, because I once had a man and it was a terrible thing to find somewhere to get help for him.
Yeah, and it's a little bit trickier because the orange door is not intended to be an intake and assessment point for men experiencing violence. But what is intended to be available is the Victims Assistance Program. And I don't know, Barbara, whether that was the experience you had trying to access, but essentially the Victims of Crime Helpline is who we would be directing male victim survivors to. And then from there are local providers for victims assistance, and they are in a position to provide some support to that client group.
And I had another question, but I think you've answered it. Because we work with newly arrived migrants, generally we've been referring to In Touch straight away, but I'm wondering, really, should we go to Orange Door now and not, you know?
You can refer to In Touch, and we will too. So if we're working with a family and we identify and they identify that they need that really culturally specific response, then we would be making referrals to In Touch. But you can certainly refer to us as well. So I guess the difference being that the type of assessment that might happen in the Orange Door is perhaps a bit more extensive. So clearly we'll be looking at family violence and child wellbeing. So if you think there are those multiple needs, or if you've got multiple people in the family who might need support, so perhaps a victim survivor, but there's also someone using violence, then again, we'd be able to do that holistic assessment of all their needs and connect them with the different services. So there's no wrong door, but yeah, slightly different response, I think.
Thanks.
Other questions?
There was another question sent to me, Brendan, that somebody's got a student who's a refugee, a victim of domestic violence. She's got a caseworker. Should she give the information about Orange Door or go to the caseworker first?
It probably depends on where the caseworker's from. So that caseworker might be a family violence worker, so from a family violence organisation, perhaps. You can certainly call the Orange Door in your area, depending on where it is, to seek that advice. But if there is a caseworker, I'd probably have a chat with them first, depending on their role. But there's no reason you couldn't seek some support or advice from the Orange Door as well. And certainly visa status doesn't matter from the point of view of the Orange Door. We can provide that support to anyone. Any other questions? Has anyone had an experience engaging with an Orange Door in their area? Just out of curiosity.
I've had presentations from, what was the name, from the northeastern one. She's come to some of the multicultural and settlement network meetings to promote that Orange Door.
Yeah, that'll be Dell, Barbara. So yeah, Dell's been in that role for a while, and their Orange Door has been open for a while. So in fact, there'll be a whole heap of things that Dell probably know and be experiencing that I'm not just yet, given we're pretty new.
Brendan, I've just got a question.
Sure.
I think I've frozen. There we go. I'm just wondering what advice you can give us. Many of us here are teachers that are student-facing or volunteers who work one-on-one with learners in the AMEP. And if we're to share this information because of a particular concern or a request for this information, what advice can you give us in terms of the manner in which we might do that, or how to be culturally sensitive and a little bit more in around that aspect as well, rather than just to give us a few pointers, I guess.
Yeah, so I can certainly talk to kind of information sharing Carol, if that's kind of at the heart of the question. In terms of culturally responsive practice, I'm certainly not the expert. Many of you will probably be more expert in that area than me. But in terms of information sharing, and I guess kind of how we can respond and what we would do with information in the Orange Door. So anyone can contact us, and we can respond in a few different ways depending on the situation. So if you're working with someone and you're concerned around family violence, for example, but perhaps as a victim survivor of family violence and you don't have their permission to seek a referral, or that's not something that they're interested in, but you're really worried about them, you can call us and have a de-identified consultation. So you could say, look, I'm working with someone, I don't want to give their details, but here's the situation. And our practitioners would be able to give some advice and a sense of whether we would be concerned about what we're hearing, and potentially if we think that person's at risk. Similarly, you can, if someone is at serious risk, let me go back a step. If anyone is at serious risk from family violence, or there are children whose safety or well-being are at risk, then anybody can share information for the purposes of managing and intervening in that risk without consent. So it's not illegal to make a referral or to share information about someone if you have some serious concerns around their safety, or if there are children involved. So yeah, I'll just see there from Jill, where there's mandatory reporting about children. So if children are at risk of harm, you can absolutely call Child Protection or call the Orange Door, and you can provide whatever information you need to, and there's no risk there from kind of a legal point of view. And family violence is a bit more similar now than it used to, in the sense that if someone's at serious risk, then you can also share information. And we can too. So that's part of the way we work, is we'd be receiving reports sometimes where someone hasn't wanted us to receive that information. But if we have a really serious concern that they might be at risk of being killed, for example, that we actually have a responsibility to act on that, and to share information with other organisations like the police, for example, to try and keep that person safe. Obviously, we'd always been doing that in a really sensitive and careful way, and conscious of people's consent and people's views. We're not going to go around sharing information about people unless we absolutely have to. And also aware, particularly in many different cultural backgrounds, there's plenty of complexities around family situations and not wanting people to, potentially not wanting to disclose family violence because of the implications within a family and things along those lines. So we're aware of those issues, and certainly we're considering all of that when we decide how to respond to a referral. So it's not the case that the moment we get the information, we're going to give the person a call and say, hey, what's going on here? We've got to really consider their circumstances and the impact that might have on them and their family, at the same time balancing their safety and risk to children. So there's lots of things we have to kind of weigh up. And I think I saw another question pop up around what about the elderly? Yeah, so we, I don't know if that was in relation to kind of mandatory reporting, because it popped in underneath it. There isn't mandatory reporting that I'm familiar with, but maybe others are more expert in that area around older people who are at risk. But certainly the Orange Door can work with older people who are experiencing family violence. And so, I mean, many types of elder abuse are clearly family violence. And so we can take those referrals and we can provide support in those situations. I would say it's probably not an area that as many of our practitioners have specialism in, as, for example, working with children, but it is an area we'll be constantly developing and connecting with other organisations to make sure we're doing things in the right way. And I'm speaking from our Orange Door too. It might be there are other Orange Doors where there are a number of practitioners who do have that particular skill and passion. So probably something worth worth asking if you're considering making a referral. So there was a question there, Malcolm, around educating students that family violence is a serious matter. Yes, and this is a community-wide issue, and in communities from many language and cultural backgrounds, and just a community more broadly. It's not necessarily the role the Orange Door plays, but certainly it's part of the role of Family Safety Victoria. So there are other parts of our organisation who do things like community education. I know that many local governments, women's health organisations, for example, they play a big role in that kind of prevention space, so doing community education. So if you're looking for something like that, I would consider chatting to your local government, or somewhere like Women's Health East or Women's Health West, Women's Health in the North, I think it is. And some other family violence organisations. So I know EDVOS in the Eastern region, they have an arm of their organisation that does training and development. So not the Orange Door, but there are other organisations that do that. Nahal has a question around, can we share this information with our learner, friends or relatives? Absolutely. And the slide pack I'll send around, I'm happy for you to share it. I don't know if it's the most useful content, perhaps with people who are seeking support. I've probably designed it more for kind of professionals and other services. I would say the Orange Door website would be the best place to point people if they're wanting some information. But there's nothing kind of secret in those slides. So happy for you to talk about the information there.
Brendan, on the website, I haven't, you might have mentioned this, but I just haven't picked up on it. Is there information about Orange Door in multiple languages available on the website?
Yes, and that's one of the big benefits of the website compared to perhaps some of our printed material, is I think there's, I might get this wrong, but I think there's about 30 different languages that the website can be translated into. We don't have that with all our printed material and PowerPoints and things like that. So hence why the website's probably a good place to go. Are there any other questions? Thank you.
It doesn't sound like it. So thanks, Brendan, once again for your time today. We really appreciate it, and learning a bit more about the Orange Door. And I'm sure anyone that has got questions can direct them to you, or go onto the Orange Door website and find out more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
And if you're not in the Inner East and you're wanting to connect with, say, my role in a different Orange Door, just let me know and I can pass on your details or pass on that person's details to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time today. Thanks.
See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brendan.